The board will now come to order. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderwoman Schweitzer. Alderman Oldenburg. Alderman Cone. Alderman Narayan. Alderman Vollmer. Alderwoman Velazquez. Alderwoman Sanier. Alderwoman Spencer. Alderman Browning. Alderwoman Clark Hubbard. Alderwoman Keys. Alderwoman Tyus. Alderwoman Boyd. Alderman Aldridge. President Green.
Present.
Alderman Oldenburg. Alderman Cone. Alderwoman Velazquez. Alderwoman Sanier. Alderwoman Spencer. 12 present. You have quorum.
A quorum being present, we will dispense with line item 3 and go straight to our special order of the day. We will begin by taking up the courtesy resolutions consent calendar. Is Alderwoman from the 10th here? Is it not working? Can we turn up the volume a little bit more then? Okay, is that better? Ooh, now I'm very loud. Is Alderwoman from the 10th here for the courtesy resolutions calendar? I'll go ahead and I'll recognize the Alderman from the 14th while we track down the Alderwoman from the 10th.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board.
Would you like to move for the adoption of the courtesy resolutions
I'd
calendar?
like to move for the adoption of the courtesy resolution calendar.
It's been moved by the Alderman from the 14th, seconded by the Alderwoman from the 1st, that we adopt the courtesy resolutions calendar. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Alderwoman from the 10th, please approach the dais for presentation of resolution number 46.
All right. Thank you, Madam President, members of the board. I would like to invite the amazing representation from We Collab to come up to the dais with me. I love it. Everybody's so humble. I love it. All right, Madam Clerk, could you please read the resolution?
Resolution 46, honoring We Collab. Whereas We Collab is a plan that uses voices of the people living in the West End and Visitation Park neighborhoods to create a community where everyone can live, work, and play. And whereas the We Collab plan is a resident-led effort and is intended to guide growth and develop in an organized, efficient, and equitable manner for years to come. And whereas We Collab in St. Louis is a worthy recipient of the 2023 Congress for New Urbanism International Charter Award in the Neighborhood District and Corridor category, bestowed upon it during the Congress for New Urbanism Award ceremony held in May of 2023. Whereas We Collab in St. Louis is an initiative to revitalize adjacent neighborhoods in St. Louis by conducting an extensive public outreach strategy in neighborhoods planning by involving citizens in West End and Visitation Park neighborhoods to serve as a consulting team to rebuild their own community, and in doing so lay the groundwork to realize one of the central visions of the Charter of the New Urbanism for the revitalization, growth of existing urban centers. And whereas We Collab was truly a residential strategic approach where community members lead the engagement and work with steering committee to choose focus areas, which include 757 new residential units in both a mixture of affordable and market rate apartments and attached and detached single family homes, plus 100,000 square feet of retail and office and light industrial space. Whereas the CNU International Charter Awards jury was impressed by the community leadership, wherein residents wrote the request for proposals, selected the consultant, managed the budget, and made decisions to develop a focused yet comprehensive plan for the neighborhoods of the West End Visitation Park in St. Louis. And whereas all of this concluded with the residents themselves presenting the final plan for acceptance to the community and subsequently Planning Commission and the City of St. Louis, which has adopted We Collab's successful method for future revitalization of other St. Louis neighborhoods. Now, therefore, let it be resolved by this Honorable Board of Aldermen of the City of St. Louis that we pause in our deliberations to recognize and congratulate We Collab for their inspiring and successful neighborhood planning efforts. We further direct the clerk of this board to spread a copy of this resolution across the minutes of the proceedings and to prepare a commemorative copy to the end that it may be presented to the honorees at a time and place deemed appropriate by the sponsor. Introduced this 14th day of July 2023 by the Honorable Shameen Clark Hubbard, Alderwoman of the 10th Ward.
All right, thank you so much, Madam Clerk. And what I'll say is, before I invite their representative to come up and speak, is that I'm just thankful, right, to be able to serve and advocate for you all in such a time like this. This process started we both got thrown off the porch at the same time, right? And so I was elected. This had just gotten started off by the amazing women that applied for this grant and earned it and got the award for the neighborhood. And so, you know, watching this process and watching all of you all engage, and just know that this is just a mere representation. It was so many people that was involved in this process. I mean, countless people. We would fill this room and the galley. And so, you know, earlier this week in the HUD committee, somebody on social media, you know how they do, they tried to use my words and transform what I said into a divisive narrative. What I said was, it was so good to see a neighborhood this far along. And what I meant by that was that I had just seen my neighborhood go through what this neighborhood had gone through and get to this point where we stood in that room and everybody clapped when our plan was adopted by the city of St. Louis and now will be used as a visionary piece for other neighborhoods. So, you know, I am so encouraged by the work that we can do together, not just here. We can be the example, but in the city of St. Louis, if people just work together instead of using pieces and using things to divide and work against each other and work against ourselves most times. When I was running, the main thing I heard was that things keep happening to us in the West End and not with us. Yes. And so I stood on my word, and I'm proud of that. The community stood on the word, and I'm proud of you all. And now we have the We Collab plan.
Yes. And we thank you for your support.
Yes. And so with that, I would like to invite Ms. Queen Celeste Metcalf to say a few words.
I want to say thank you, Alderman Hubbard, for all of your support. I thank every member of our community who participated in this effort, and we have come a long way, and I'm just so thankful to be here. We appreciate your support. Thank you so much.
Just want to echo the comments from the Alderwoman from the 10th. Thank you so much for all of your community work, for your engagement, for making sure that processes are inclusive and truly representative of communities. That is a model that we all can stand to learn from. And so I am really excited to present you with this resolution today, and I know that this is just the beginning of great work that is yet to come. So thank you for your service to the city.
And just before we conclude, I would be remiss if I did not recognize Invest STL, right? Because we wouldn't be here without them. That's just the reality of it. But what I would like to also recognize is that they're not standing up here with us. Even though I asked them to, they absolutely stood on resident-led, right? And so thank you, Invest STL. And thank you again.
Yes, if we could gather on the steps here, and anybody who would like to take a picture with We Collab, please feel free to come up. Introduction of honored guests. Do we have any introduction of honored guests? Alderwoman from the 1st. It is a very tall microphone today.
Shamim, give me your heels. Sorry. Thank you so much, Madam President, members of the board. Today I'd like to have as my honored guest Jameson Ramirez from the Service Employees International Union. We have a first reading of a bill today that's very exciting, and just want to say thank you for all your work and everything you do for the city and for unions across the state. Thank you.
Any further introduction of honored guests? Alderman from the 14th.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board. A regular honor guest that continues to come down here. He's a resident of the 14th Ward and the Sheriff of the City of St. Louis, Mr. Vernon Betts.
Any further introduction of honored guests? Any further introduction of honored guests? Seeing none, I will, Alderwoman from the 10th, you're recognized on the approval of the minutes from Friday, July 7th, 2023.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board. I move that we approve the minutes from Friday, July 7th, 2023.
Is there a second? It's been moved by the Alderwoman from the 10th, seconded by the Alderman from the 4th, that we approve the minutes from Friday, July 7th, 2023. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Report of city officials.
Report of city officials can be found in A, B, and C of the agenda and has been placed in the Google Drive for your review.
Petitions and communications. We can dispense with line item 8. Does anyone wish to take any bills or resolutions off of any of our informal calendars? Does anyone wish to take any bills or resolutions? Alderwoman from the 6th.
Bill 71 off the
79.
79, thank you, off the informal consent calendar and onto the perfection calendar.
Perfection consent calendar?
Yes, in the perfection consent calendar.
Madam Clerk, if you could please place Board Bill 79 on the regular, or on the perfection consent, at the end of the perfection consent calendar.
Thank you, Madam President.
So noted.
Any Alderman from the 4th?
I'd like to move 29 committee sub to the regular perfection calendar. I'm a co-sponsor of that.
You are a co-sponsor?
Yes.
Okay. Madam Clerk, if you would please place 29 committee substitute as amended at the end of the regular perfection calendar.
So noted.
First reading of board bills.
Board Bill 83, sponsored by Alderwoman Schweitzer and President Green, an ordinance establishing requirements pertaining to the retention of employees performing janitorial, building maintenance, and security services under the contracts for such services with the City of St. Louis or a city agency, providing for certain exemptions, setting forth the consequences for violations, establishing requirements in the event the city or city agency outsources janitorial, building, maintenance, and security services being performed by employees of the city or city agency, establishing policies in the event the city or city agency determines to have its employees perform janitorial, building, maintenance, and security services, and contain the severability and effective date clause. Board Bill 84, sponsored by Alderman Vollmer, an ordinance recommended by the Board of Estimate and Apportionment authorizing the Fire Commissioner on behalf of the City of St. Louis to enter into the 2021 Assistance to Firefighter Grants Agreement with the U.S. Department of Homeland Security and accept the grant funds, appropriating said funds, and a required city match for said funds, and authorizing the Fire Commissioner to expend the appropriate funds by entering into contracts or otherwise for grant purposes, and contain an emergency clause. Board Bill 85, sponsored by Alderwoman Velazquez and President Green, an ordinance establishing the Fanning School Residential Parking District and the location and restrictions for curb parking within the district, and authorizing the placement of permit parking only signs and prohibiting the parking of any vehicle in the district that does not display the required permit, and providing a penalty for violations, and containing an emergency clause. Board Bill 86, sponsored by Alderwoman Velazquez and President Green, an ordinance recommended by the Planning Commission 2023 to change the zoning of property indicated on the district map from B, two-family dwelling district, to D, multiple-family dwelling district, in the tract of land that is all of City Block 15 97 in Block 4 of the Robert W. Hunt's edition, more particularly described in this ordinance. That's the extent of first reading of board bills.
Reference to Committee of Board Bills.
To the Budget and Public Employees Committee, Board Bill 83. To Public Safety, Board Bill 84. To HUDs, Board Bill 85 and 86. That's the extent of reference to committee.
Second reading and report of standing committees.
The following board bills were reported out of HUDs with the due pass recommendation. Board Bill 30, sponsored by Alderwoman Tyus, an ordinance amending the redevelopment plan for the Cary, Boer, Adelaide, and North 3rd Street redevelopment area. Board Bill 66, sponsored by Alderwoman Tyus, an ordinance approving a redevelopment plan dated May 23, 2023, for 4923 through 4949 Dr. Martin Luther King Drive area in the city of St. Louis. Board Bill 72, sponsored by Alderman Browning, an ordinance approving a redevelopment plan dated May 23, 2023, for 4221 through 4227 Forest Park Avenue in the city of St. Louis. Board Bill 75, sponsored by Alderman Cone and Alderwoman Sanier, an ordinance approving a redevelopment plan dated April 25, 2023, for the Marquette Park Scatter Sites area in the city of St. Louis. The following board bill was reported out of legislation with a due pass recommendation. Board Bill 71, sponsored by Alderwoman Velazquez and Alderwoman Clark Hubbard, an ordinance recommended by the Board of Estimate and Apportionment, accepting local record preservation grant program funding and authorizing the city register on behalf of the city of St. Louis to enter into a grant agreement with the Missouri Secretary of State and to contract to expend such funds. That is the extent of second reading report of standing committees.
Alderwoman from the 6th, you're recognized on the motion to suspend the rules for the purposes of moving Board Bill 71 to the perfection consent calendar.
Thank you. I move to suspend the rules to move this to perfection, to the perfection to consent calendar. This is a bill that, just for everybody's awareness, that Register Sims is applying for a grant and received a grant from the state of Missouri to digitize, I believe, ordinances 0 through 40. So we're moving to expedite the process so that office can begin work before we break for summer.
There is a motion. Is there a second? It's been moved by the Alderwoman from the 6th, seconded by the Alderman from the 14th, that we suspend the rules for the purposes of moving Board Bill 71 to the perfection consent calendar. All those in favor signify, Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Alderwoman Schweitzer. Alderman Odenberg. Alderman Cone. Alderman Narayan. Alderman Balmer. Alderwoman Velazquez. Alderwoman Sanier. Alderwoman Spencer. Alderman Browning. Alderwoman Clark Hubbard. Alderwoman Keys. Alderwoman Tyus. Alderwoman Boyd. Alderman Aldridge. President Green.
Aye.
Alderman Cone. 14 aye votes.
Madam Clerk, please place Board Bill 71 on the perfection consent calendar.
So noted.
Report of special committees.
We have none.
We can dispense with line item 15, Board Bills for perfection consent.
Board Bill 79, sponsored by Alderwoman Velazquez, and ordinance directing the Director of Streets pursuant to ordinance number 70333 as amended by ordinance number 71394 to install speed humps to calm the flow of traffic on the 4000 block of Hartford Street, 3700 block of Gustine Avenue, 3500 block of Giles Avenue, 3200 block of Hawthorne Boulevard, 3400 block of Hawthorne Boulevard, 3200 block of Longfellow Boulevard, and the 3400 block of Longfellow Boulevard. Board Bill 71, sponsored by Alderwoman Velazquez and Alderwoman Clark Hubbard, an ordinance recommended by the Board of Estimate and Apportionment accepting local records preservation grant program funding and authorizing the city register on behalf of the city of St. Louis to enter into a grant agreement with the Missouri Secretary of State and to contract to expend such funds. That is the extent of board bills for perfection consent calendar.
Alderwoman from the 10th, you are recognized on the adoption of Board Bills for perfection consent calendar.
Thank you, Madam President. Members of the board, I move that we adopt the board bills for perfection consent calendar.
It's been moved by the Alderwoman from the 10th, seconded by the Alderman from the 14th, that we approve the perfection consent calendar. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderwoman Schweitzer. Alderman Oldenburg. Alderman Cone. Alderman Narayan. Alderman Balmer. Alderwoman Velazquez. Alderwoman Sanier. Alderwoman Spencer. Alderman Browning. Alderwoman Clark Hubbard. Alderwoman Keys. Alderwoman Tyus. Alderwoman Boyd. Alderman Aldridge. President Green.
Aye.
Alderman Cone. 14 aye votes.
By your vote, you sustain the motion to approve the perfection consent calendar. Board bills for perfection.
Board Bill 82, sponsored by Alderman Aldridge. An ordinance requiring officers of the City of St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department to identify themselves as specified therein when requesting that a person consent to a search of their person, property, vehicle, or home when the search is not pursuant to a warrant or exception to warrant requirements under applicable law.
Alderman from the 14th, you are recognized on the perfection of Board Bill 82.
Thank you, Madam President and members of the board. I would like to make a motion to adopt floor substitute
Perfect.
or perfect Board Bill.
First, you need to perfect the bill, ask for perfection of the bill, and then we will make a motion to adopt the floor substitute.
Gotcha. I would like to make a motion to perfect Board Bill 82.
It's been moved by the alderwoman or alderman from the 14th, seconded by the alderwoman from the 8th, that we perfect Board Bill number 82. Alderman, you may proceed.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board. I would like to make a motion to adopt floor substitute 1 to Board Bill 82, or floor substitute to Board Bill 82.
It's been moved by the alderman from the 14th, seconded by the alderman from the 9th, that we adopt floor substitute to Board Bill 82. Is there any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Alderman, you may proceed on Board Bill 82 floor substitute.
Thank you, Madam President and members of the board. Board Bill 82, floor substitute, is a cleanup bill to a bill that was introduced a few weeks ago. We made a lot of changes to the bill, but before we get to the changes, I just want to talk about the concept of the bill. So it's two main things to this bill. It's kind of called the Know Your Right bill. This is a transparency bill so that people know their rights when it comes to consent searches, and when those consent searches happen, how an officer must provide a business card. So on page 2, we break down what a consent search means. So this is mainly with an officer is having an interaction with somebody, and say it's either in their car, their property, or in person, and they're talking to them and they want to be able to search their purse, their bag. The officer has to inform the person that, hey, you have the right to allow me to search your belongings, or you have the ability not to allow me to search it. During that search at any point, the individual have the right to revoke that search. During that search, after the search is over, the officer must provide a business card. It's a card that officers already have and have on them as they are out there in the line of duty. One thing that we're adding to the business card on top of their name, their badge number, an email and a phone number is on the back of that card is the COB information, the civilian oversight information. So at any point during that search, if a person felt like their rights was violated, they can either make a complaint to COB, but also on page 2, it also says comment. I know some of my colleagues was curious about compliments. I don't think this is the spirit of the bill to make a compliment, but if a person also want to make a comment, which could be a compliment, they could be able to do that as well. During this cleanup of the language, I know a lot of my colleagues had concerns that, we didn't want to rush the bill, so we held it up 1 week. Before the bill came to committee, I met with the chief and his chief of staff to see from the bill that we filed what needed to be added, any changes. One of the issues that we ran into is the department policy isn't online. So with not trying to tie the chief hands, we wanted to meet with him personally to figure out what some of those changes could be. After last Friday's Board of Aldermen meeting, Myself, Alderman Narayan, Alderman Spencer, the mayor's administration, Chief Tracy, and his staff also met again to make some cleanup language. Some of that language that we cleaned up is in the bill. We had law enforcement activity covered in the bill several times, and that was a concern with the chief to not make sure that anytime a law enforcement is having activity with somebody, do they have to do a consent search? Do they have to do hand out a business card? One of their suggestions was to clean that up. So after also sending it to Sheena, our legal team, we cleaned up that law enforcement activity to make it a lot more clearer and clean. So anytime there's a consent search is when a business card need to be handed out. So we took out law enforcement activity in that way. We also made sure that our law enforcement officers, if there's a probable cause or suspicion for them to do a search, that consent search would not be needed. On page 3, going into page 4, also lay out several examples when, again, they would need to do a consent search. The goal was to not try to tie officer hands, but at the same time, it's important that while we don't see the policy online, down at the Board of Aldermen, our role is to pass policy, to codify it into law. I would say everything that we're doing in this bill is already in their policy outside of adding the COB. And what we're doing is codifying it into law so that members of the public can, one, know their rights, but when this hopefully get passed, that they'll be able to see it online. I'm encouraged that as we met with the chief, he is working, as he's new, working to make sure that the policy is online so that people can be able to see it. On page 4, we talk about the development of that policy. So it says the department shall develop a policy around consent search. We also give them 90 days to develop that policy. In the meeting with the chief of police and the mayor last Monday, I know one of the concerns of my colleagues was, will this take officers off the street? Will they be just filling out a whole bunch of paperwork? Well, luckily, we was able to see that there's already a policy around consent searches. It's a 2-page policy. The chief understands we may have to add wording to the consent search paper as far as like demographics, as far as race, age, and whatnot, and he's willing to do that. On page 5, we go and we talk about how this policy shall include procedures and clear guidance of keeping and maintaining records. We cleaned up a lot of that language because one of the concerns is if that consent search is potentially used in a criminal activity. The original language was very vague in that anybody can get it. We cleaned it up that the person who is the individual who had got a consent search, they are the ones who would be able to get that potential consent search document. Very similar to if somebody go to a police department and they ask for, if they fill out a officer, if their car is broken into and they got to get a police report, very similar. Officers already keep and maintain that records. When talking with Chief Tracy, he said that that's something that his department would be able to do as far as keeping and maintaining those records. Lastly, we also put in the bill, which we cleaned up, that the department have to put their policy on the website when it comes to what it looks like for a consent search, as well as business card. And anytime the department make changes to their policy, that they will deliver a hand copy or via email, because we understand we're in the 21st century, via email to the Board of Aldermen clerk so that we can have the updated policy of the police department or any changes that they make. Ideally, if this bill gets passed, we're giving the department discretion to develop the policy, 90 days to do that, and 180 days for them to figure out the rest of the bill as far as business cards when consent searches happen. And with that, Madam President, I will yield for any questions to my colleagues.
Any further discussion? Alderwoman from the 10th? Or 8th, sorry. I'm looking at the 10th as the 8th is walking up.
I get confused about which ward I am anyway. Thank you, Madam President, members of the board. Let's see here. Well, I don't have any questions that I do want to I'm rising in support of this bill. I want to first commend the sponsor for taking a moment after our last meeting. I'm grateful for the opportunity to have sat down with you and the chief to work out some just small concerns, I would say, and making sure that we could get a bill that would be that was in line with the current police policy. I do think that this is a good step in the right direction of transparency. I want to add that, for the comment section, when our police officers do respond, I do think it's important, and I'm grateful that we're having the ability to not only log complaints, but compliments as well. And I have already submitted my first set of compliments to 4 police officers who responded last weekend to a shooting behind my house with exemplary professionalism and service to the community. And I just really think that this Board Bill 82 is a really good step in the right direction of working together, sitting down with our police department and finding ways to build trust with the community. That's all I have. Thank you, Madam President.
Any further discussion? Alderman from the 2nd.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board. I still rise in opposition of this board bill, but I do want to publicly thank the aldermen of the 4th, the 5th, the 9th, the 11th, and the 13th for last week voting no or abstaining, so there weren't enough votes to suspend the rules on this. Those folks are the true champions here of slowing down what was very rushed legislation. There was a meeting that was able to be had as a result of those no votes and us not being able to suspend the rules, and we've got a better bill. We've had time for the city councilor to weigh in, remove legal activities, limiting the scope of this legislation simply to the consent search policy, which already exists. But I do want to thank those aldermen for their courage in voting no and allowing that additional meeting to happen. I still remain in opposition to this. I believe that it's rushed. I believe that it is a problem or a solution that's in search of many problems. I also believe, I'm entitled to my own political opinion, that this bill is window dressing and political cover for Board Bill 29, and I think it just takes time and resources away from really solving public safety issues in the city of St. Louis. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Alderwoman for the 1st.
Thank you so much, Madam President, members of the board. Would the alderman from the 14th yield for questions?
The alderman from the 14th yield for questioning to the alderwoman from the 1st.
Yes.
Alderwoman, you may proceed.
Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for all the time you've taken to talk to me and everybody else about this bill, and to the aldermen from the 4th and from the 8th for their work with meeting with you at the chief to work out the details. Some of the questions I have really involve the police response to this bill. When you met with the chief in the Public Safety Committee and then during your conversations with him, what were his main concerns about the bill? And then kind of a secondary question to that, were those concerns addressed in this floor substitute?
What was interesting when I first met with the chief several weeks ago, myself and our attorney here at the board, Mr. Galley, just to make sure everything was right. The chief didn't have concerns with the business card or the consent search. He said he just had concerns that he wanted to be able to implement the policy. With him being a new chief of police, he didn't want legislation to go through where he wasn't being able to implement it. And I assured him, that's why we put a caveat in there of 90 days. I think, 3 months is a nice amount of time for a policy that they already actually have when it comes to consent search. In that second meeting, we was actually able to see the documentations of that policy when it comes to consent search. I know some colleagues here say it takes away time from officers, or they're going to be taken away from the cars into the street or whatnot. But this policy, when it comes to consent search, is already within their policy in that documentation. They may have to add a few more wording to the consent search documentation. But in the second meeting is when I believe the chief and others was really able to dive into it. I couldn't tell you at the first meeting, outside of that, the chief wanted to develop himself what was the meat concerns that he really had. I know the Police Association during the committee hearing talked about their big issue is that they didn't want a long 4-page document where people was going to have to fill out. Luckily, during that second meeting, we was able to see that it's actually only 2 pages and it's already in their policy. Officers already fill out a documentation when it comes to consent searches. So during that second meeting, thank you to also the mayor's team, especially Ms. Baker, who serves as their policy person. It was really a lot of language cleanup, making sure that we didn't have redundancies, making sure that we had verbiage in the bill that was legally sound, that was able to, if this bill go into effect, that it would not potentially cause confusion. So we really zoned in on taking away a lot of those redundant words in there, taking out law enforcement activity, so not making it so confusing when these searches or when these cards are handed out, and took that out and just completely left consent searches. And in that, that's when a business card, we even took out shall and put must be presented to also give them a little bit of discretion. So it was mainly cleanup in the second meeting that we had with the search. Again, not against the idea of doing what they already do within their policy. Unfortunately, we wasn't able to see it because the policy is not online, so I appreciate the chief. I appreciate the mayor's office for sitting down with us and showing the documents that they have, but more language cleanup so that we can make sure that what we're trying to do here just to codify their policy and law would not make it even more confusing within their policy. And we give them the discretion, I think on page 3 or 4, to be able to develop that policy, which they already have developed.
Thank you. And so the business cards that will be provided, do you imagine that these will be, because they need them for these consent searches, which I think you mentioned only happen a very small number of times? I mean, that's what you had said.
Yeah, when we met with the chief, when we asked him how many times these consent searches happen, he said he has to go back and look because he's new, but it's very few. And I know that was a concern from the alderman from the second ward. Why are we doing this? I think this is being proactive. We don't need for a protest to break out to then say, let's do legislation. I think we're trying to be proactive to inform the public on their rights when it comes to consent searches. As a elected official, I didn't even know a consent search was a thing, and we made it very clear when business cards are handed out. I think there was some confusion in the first bill of like, if I'm walking down the street, if I'm talking to a civilian, do I have to hand out a business card? Right. I think it would, ideally, I think our officers are good officers, and they make sure when they go to community meetings, when they're interacting with people, they already hand out their card. But we definitely want to put it in legislation when a consent search happens that they must hand out a card, especially if that consent search go wrong. If I'm driving down the street and I get pulled over because my tail light's out and you want to search my car, my purse. Historically, when I've talked to people in the community, they didn't know that they had the right to not even allow a search happen if they don't have a warrant, right, or if they don't have any violations. So this is just putting it in law so people can know their rights. And when these consent searches do happen, which hopefully won't be a lot of times, that they must also provide the civilian with a card with their name, badge number, and the consent or the COB information on the backside.
I think it's really interesting because, like you're saying, these consent searches happen so rarely now that the business card that will be created that they have to have on hand in case these happen, do you imagine that will just be the default business card with the civilian oversight information on the back of the card, thus kind of letting more people know about the Civilian Oversight Board in general?
I think it's that, and I think right now, if a consent search happened with us not seeing the policy, that may not be that they have to pass out the card. So I think what we're adding to it, which I've recently got a police officer's card, and what also I didn't see on there was like the badge number, right? I know that's been something when people are interacting with law enforcement, they say, hey, what's your name, what's your badge number? The chief has made it very clear this is something he's tell his officers to do. I think it's one thing, and not saying they're not doing it, it's one thing to tell somebody, and I think it's another thing to put it in law to make sure it's codified. So I think with having that COB, which this Board of Aldermen has passed, I know there has been something after 2014, the Ferguson movement. Our clerk Kennedy pushed to make sure it got done, and then the alderwoman from the 10th even took it further. It's about educating people about the systems and the organizations that we have at the City of St. Louis when it comes to civilian oversight. If something were to happen, to be clear, if something were to happen, not saying it will happen, but they know that they have the ability to go out and make a complaint and say that they felt like their rights was violated to the Civilian Oversight Board, the same board that, again, that we passed down here at the Board of Aldermen. So it's education on, I think, the COB, but it's also educating people to know that they have the right to allow a consent search to happen or don't happen. And right now, as I talk to people before the bill came, and I talked to community members, like, do you even know that a consent search is a thing? It was like, no. It's been times where they were just searched, and they didn't do anything. They didn't have a warrant. They were searched, and no rights was told to them that you have the ability not to allow this search to happen.
Well, the main thing that I heard the chief say during the public safety meeting is a concern that he wouldn't be in charge of crafting the policies within his own department. I think that makes sense. If you're a leader of a department, you want to be at the table, part of the discussion, and making sure that the policies that are being created are being led with people from the background that you think is the most relevant to make decisions for a department. And so in this bill, it's my understanding from Section 4, the policy and procedures for consent searches, that it says the department shall develop the policy and standard procedures. So to me, that is the most important line in terms of where the chief really came down on this. And I think, from my perspective, he's been doing a fantastic job. I've seen more officers out in the community just getting to know folks than I have before. They did a roll call in my neighborhood in the Patch just this week where there were a few dozen officers there just talking to folks and being available. So it seems like this really does put some specifics in the bill in terms of, you're right, badge number, specific things on the card, a specific kind of letting folks know what a consent search is before it happens, but that the rest of the policy will still lie within the police department to establish and create and write down.
Absolutely. It gives the department the ability to write that policy, and it doesn't say you have to do it within 10 days, 30 days, 60 days. I think 3 months of something that's already in their policy. The only thing we're doing is codifying it and making sure that from this board that it is a transparent policy to those two things. Like you said, I got faith in the chief. He's a new chief. I think he's been doing a good job. When I look on TV and I see all our officers wearing hats and like they actually are dressed, look professional, something that he's implemented. Like, those are the small things, but I know that as we had conversations with him, it's so many other things that he want to do, and I think his biggest holdup is he didn't want the department hands tied. He didn't want legislation to go into effect where we are doing things and it's making it harder for his job as he's trying to internally look at what hasn't been happening in the police department. Now that we have outside eyes in, I think that's beneficial. Because for so long, when you have somebody just from internal, sometimes folks don't like change. So I know he's willing to make change in the department, and what we wanted to do is give him the ability to make the change of something that he already has, and for us at the board to be able to make sure that it is something that the public know that is out there, and just codifying his policy.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your time. Those are all my questions for you. I would like to kind of speak on some comments from my colleague from the Second Ward about this bill being political cover for Board Bill 29, Committee Substitute as amended. And, I think that's an interesting choice of words, political cover. I would probably prefer to use the word compromise, or finding places that we might agree so that we can have a better outcome for everyone in the city of St. Louis. I am a co-sponsor of Board Bill 29, Committee Substitute as amended, and I would like to be added as a co-sponsor to this bill. Thank you.
Madam Clerk, please make note of that and add the Alderwoman from the 1st as a co-sponsor. If you would also add me as a co-sponsor as well, I would appreciate it. Any further discussion? Alderwoman from the 12th.
Madam President, members of the board, I rise in support of this board bill. I will say that it probably doesn't go far enough for me, because I know people don't know about consent searches because the police don't tell them that. And the laws of the land have allowed the police to lie to you to get information from you, which I really disagree with. So I am a supporter of police, but I'm also a supporter of people having their rights before them. I don't understand the controversy about this bill, because the reason why police officers wear badges with their DSN on it is so that we know who the police officers are. And so to go further, especially in a consent search, because the police will just say to you, hey, is it all right if I search your glove compartment? And they have no right to do it. And so they don't have to tell you in those consent searches when you say yes, that, hey, you have a right to say no. So to me, this should be their business card for everything. It should be for voluntary, involuntary, any kind of searches. This card should be used. This is a great idea. Wish I would have thought of it. People's life and liberty are at risk when the police search them. Things can go wrong often. So to be able to just be able to say, no, I don't want you to search me. You don't have a right. The alderman from the 14th used the thing. Sometimes they will stop people for a tail light. and then they go into their glove compartments and things. When I was an attorney with the public defenders, we fought that all the time. That's beyond the scope of what your search is. You should not be doing that. And I don't understand why people don't want people to know their rights, and why the police shouldn't be able to be the people that say, hey, you have a right to say this. If I'm using my authority that's granted to me under the state, then I also should be able to make sure that people have a right to say no. I would like to inquire if the Alderman from the 14th would yield for a question.
Would the Alderman from the 14th yield to questioning from the Alderwoman from the 12th?
I do.
Alderwoman, you may proceed.
Thank you. Alderman, the only question I have is about the person's right to withdraw their consent in the middle of a search. That gets dicey to me. Will our body cams be running so that this is recorded?
So that was on the page when we talk about how this can be tracked. We also put in there, if it's not written, that it could be audio or visual. So the chief, when we talked about, what does that look like for the tracking mechanism, because we also don't just want to put some out there and the accountability part is not being taken serious. He made it very clear that he's working to make sure that all his officers wear body cams, especially the ones that are out there on the street. Now, the special agents and stuff like that, he's working to figure out what that looks like. But he did let me know that he's working to ensure that all his officers wear body cams. So, like what you was thinking about, I also thought about if I'm getting searched at one point and I revoke it, how do they say, well, oh, you didn't revoke it, right? And now,
Correct.
and they continue to search and they continue to search. So we wanted to ensure from the officer words that he will be working to make sure that officers have body cams. So if someone at some point say, you know what, you searched my glove department, now you're going to look too far, like I'm revoking this, I don't feel comfortable anymore, I feel fearful of my life, that there can also be evidence out there that it was from the civilian revoked during that time of the search.
Okay, as a former criminal defense attorney, I would say don't give access to consent searches. The answer is no. You cannot search anything of mine, okay? If you do not have the authority to do it, if it's not in pursuit of a criminal activity, the real answer should be no. If somebody comes to your house, if they don't have a warrant, no, you cannot search my house. Bring a warrant back. That's me, okay? And it's not because I'm not pro-police. It's about making sure people preserve their rights.
Absolutely.
But okay, so long as so what happens, because we have the incident that my body cam don't work or somebody turned it off. So is that going to be part of their policy of what they say happened? Because I have dealt with it from the end, okay, and I never dealt with body cams because I was here way before body cams came into effect. But if somebody turns off their body cam or their body cam accidentally doesn't work anymore, then my policy, my idea is that whatever they found after that should be the fruit of the poison tree and should not be admissible. So I'm hoping that that's something that the police would say, because we got to stop people from accidentally having their body cams turn off or they turn it off themselves. So that's just my suggestion. Other than that, I think it's a great bill. I was one of the people that was ready to suspend the rules and did vote for it. You didn't lobby me, but this is something I've been passionate about for since before you were born. I'm glad that it was cleaned up. It's always better when board bills are cleaned up. But maybe we would have cleaned it up on the floor if we got the chance, but maybe not. But it is a good thing. I don't know anything about a compromise between another bill. I wasn't a part of any of that. I just know there is no problem, be it a consent search or an involuntary search, for police officers to give you a card that says you have the right to refuse to be searched. So, and you don't have to give your consent. I don't understand it. A lot of times you don't get the DSN number because everything is going so fast, and that was a good thing years ago. But I wish we could have one where you hit you guys use all the devices, the device, and it's sent to your phone. I'm just saying, I think that everybody should know who the police officer is that they're interacting with, and not because anything is wrong, but if you want to make a report, sometimes they don't give you the DSN or they cover it up, all those kind of things. So there's nothing wrong with this bill. It is a good bill. I commend you. Like I said, I wish I would have thought of it, and I am in support of Board Bill, 29?
82.
Whatever it is.
And I do appreciate you highlighting that part of how important it is as that business card, because I know some have said, oh, well, this is just going to turn to a moment where officers are getting called on and people are just filing reports. I think, like you said, as a citizen, their job is to protect and serve, and we believe they do that. But in the cases that they don't, we should know exactly what law enforcement we're talking to, their name, their badge number, how to be able to say if they did a good job, or to be able to file a complaint. And like you say, when you're in a heat of the moment and your adrenaline's running, and you may not have a pen and paper there, and may not write down the badge number or get their name, or you go back home and you be like, I forgot what their name was because I'm doing a million things. To be able to have a simple card, which they already do, and we're expanding it to make sure that that badge number and COB is on the back, I think is important, again, for the transparency within our department and for people to know their rights. Like you say, a lot of people don't know about the consent searches. I didn't even know about it, and if it was up to me, I would have just left it as no too. But with trying to work with the department, you know, we wanted to put some buffers in there to ensure at the end of the day that they still tell people you have the right not to allow this search to happen.
And the reason you didn't know about it is because people didn't know that it could be a consent search. So they just thought they had to do it.
Yep.
So they did it. So now you're bringing it up that you just having this conversation, they get to know, oh, I can say no. And the more you have this conversation, the better for me.
Yes.
And as I said, mine would be no, I don't care. No, you can't look at anything. In fact, once a police officer came and I have a fence, and he was looking over my fence, and I came out. He was like, oh, I was just looking at your backyard. And I was like, just get off of my property and don't look at my backyard. Not because let me tell you, I get along with the police. I grew up 1/2 a block from the police, but you have no right to be searching my property and be on my property without talking to me and knocking at my door and ringing my door. So, and a lot of times police will say that, oh, I found this in plain sight. And that's not necessarily so. So I think this is really not even that a strong a thing. It's just something that should have been thought of a long time ago. And I guess as you progress, you have things. But I'm looking forward to we saying you do it for involuntary searches because you have your badge at all time. So what is the problem? Since you have your badge that has your DSN on it, not having what is the problem having a business card that has that information on it and giving it to people? So I thank you, and I will be voting in favor of this board bill.
Thank you so much, Alderwoman.
Any further discussion? Alderwoman from the 7th.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board. I just really wanted to commend really all of the board members. I think this first part of our legislative session, I've gotten to learn a lot about what legislative collaboration looks like. I know Alderwoman Schweitzer said, compromise, but I think really you have people who come from different communities who have different perspectives but serve the same city are figuring out how do we lift up each of our constituents' interests in a way that's compatible. So I really want to commend especially Alderman Aldridge and Alderwoman Spencer for talking together, for having a lot of conversations. I know many members of the public can't see some of the work that goes on behind the scenes, but Alderman Aldridge has done a lot of work for this bill and Board Bill 29 about having conversations about is there a way to do this equitably in a way that doesn't, as best we can, doesn't put folks at harm. And he's gone an extra mile to have several conversations with the police chief, with the mayor's office, with any of us who have been willing to, send an email or make a phone call. So I wanted to make sure that I commended and put on record how much I respect that and am grateful for your leadership on this. And then also wanted to address similarly a conversation about political cover-up. I think it's extremely disingenuous to call concerns by our community when they're talking about public safety and they're talking about making sure that our officers, that we're having transparent public safety and we're being honest about the history of police and we're not dismissing people's experiences and people of counts. Perhaps you've never experienced a situation like what we heard at the Public Safety Committee where community members told us times that their rights have been violated by police. And sometimes it wasn't because they're aware, it was because it was being taken advantage of. So I think it's extremely disingenuous to call that a political cover-up, and what this really was a great model of collaboration, and I think an excellent example of what it looks like to do the work and to not dismiss each other's perspectives and to address the many issues that our cities face. We face issues around public safety from gun control, but we also do face issues in our city around police officers that have advantaged their positions of power and not used their positions to protect and serve. And we have the murders of many, many black people to be a testament of that. So I wanted to make sure that I put all of that on record, and I hope moving forward we can have, there's a much better, much more productive way to have these conversations without using terms like political cover-up, especially when people are doing the work, many, many hours of hard work that is a lot of press and a lot of stressor to figure out how do all of our needs get met and how do we do this in a fair and racially equitable way. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Alderman from the 4th.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board. This piece of legislation has been a great example of the sausage making that goes into to our legislative process here. I share the concerns of the Alderwoman from the 12th, excuse me. I think that anyone who has gone through criminal procedure in law school has this kind of hard reset on their brain where they learn all about these consent searches, and sometimes it's tricky to realize that not everyone has that same background on things because basically every case book ever says, you know, more or less, if you're coming from a criminal defense perspective or you're the average man on the street, if a police officer asks to search you, the reasonable guy is probably going to say no in the case law, because if the police officer had a right to search you, he would have a warrant, or he wouldn't be asking your permission. He would have exigent circumstances, things of that nature. I do think that you know, the right, the ability for people to know their rights is paramount. I'm one of those, you know, U.S. flag waving people. I'm unapologetically American on a lot of things, and that's because of the Bill of Rights in this country, and the Fourth Amendment is a huge part of that for me. The same way that I don't want British soldiers sleeping in my house, I don't want anyone to just be able to go through my house, my pockets, my car, anything like that without having a right to do so. That being said, the initial bill here was way too broad. It wasn't great legislation. It left a lot of vagaries that would have made it next to impossible for our officers with their boots on the ground to know exactly when to hand out one of these cards and when not to. Because when you say police enforcement activity, if all of a sudden, say we're at a neighborhood meeting, a lot of us go to all of our neighborhood meetings, and we know there that residents of our communities tell a police officer pretty regularly, oh, this guy's speeding down my street, or these guys are checking door handles, or you know, on and on. Is having that conversation with someone police enforcement activity? I mean, it is someone trying to get the police to enforce the laws in their community. And I think on the initial legislation, there's a real chance that we would have had officers wandering around the streets of St. Louis handing everyone that they see a business card, which I don't think was the spirit of the legislation, but I think it would have been an unintended consequence of it. So I want to thank the alderman from the 2nd and the alderman from the 14th for a willingness to slow this process down a little bit so that we could talk to Chief Tracy, so that we could hear from the folks representing people who are actually out in the field doing the work. And we were able to find that a lot of this was already in policy, that the police already have kind of a 2-pager that they use for consent searches. And in order to really come into line with this proposed legislation, all they were going to need to do was add basically a paragraph on the ability to search, on a consent search of an individual or their bags, as well as to capture some demographic data on who these searches are happening to. I also believe, just anecdotally, that these searches are pretty rare. So I do understand the alderman from the 2nd's concern that this is a bit of a solution in search of a problem. But when I listen to some of my other colleagues, I hear that there's a problem in their community, and I'm certainly willing to listen to that. I think to his point that there's kind of horse trading on this. We've heard about collaborating, and you know, I can say from having been down here for a while, sometimes collaboration feels like horse trading, and it really depends on which seat you're sitting in. And it can be frustrating when it feels more like a horse trade than collaboration. So I will take his comment there for what I believe it's meant for. He wanted to slow, the alderman from the second wanted to slow down the legislation and make sure we got it right. And I know in his mind, he doesn't think that this is a perfect piece of legislation right now. And that's why he's expressed his opposition to it. We rarely come to perfect pieces of legislation down here. I will be supporting this today, and ultimately it's because of the work that we've put in on this, and some of that collaboration, I guess I'll call it, and then ultimately the idea that there was a concern that I think was shared by many people that this was a bit of a gotcha bill, that if a police officer didn't follow this to a T, that they were somehow going to be punished through by violating an ordinance, that you were effectively going to have a police officer breaking the law if they forgot to give someone a card. But ultimately now this legislation has been narrowly tailored to only include consent searches, and it leaves any discipline up to the police department to come up with that policy. And so when I weigh the balance here, it's not my favorite bill, but I will be supportive of it today. And with that, I will yield. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Alderwoman from the 6th.
Thank you. First, I wanted to say thank you to Alderman Aldrich from the 14th for pushing or for presenting this bill, and same with Alderwoman from the 7th for working on this. I think initially I think if Austin's going to report on anything today, it may be the definitions of political cover, collaboration, or horse trading might be the top note of today's meeting. But I think I see it as more of a compliment. I know that when we initially talked about Board Bill 29 in committee, part of our concern and my concern was how are we stopping people and what is that going to look like and for communities. And so I think this is a compliment to not only a compliment to some other legislation that we're looking at today, but a real, addressing some real concerns that are not just concerns, but experiences from people in the community. So thank you, Alderwoman from the 10th, for sharing your 12th, sorry, gotta get it right, from the 12th, for sharing your perspective today. And just glad to be horse trading or collaborating or whatever word we want to use today to make things ultimately better and safer for the people of St. Louis, but also for the officers that are protecting and serving our city.
Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Alderman from the 14th, you are recognized to close.
Thank you, Madam President and members of the board. I'll keep it short. I really do appreciate my colleagues down here who had concerns, who was actively working to make those concerns better with this legislation. Instead of just sitting on the sideline, when I reached out to everybody. One's brought those concerns to me. Some was in the meeting. I would say the original bill, with its intent, the right to know, needed a little bit of work. And I appreciate, again, all the people that showed up to the table to help me get it to a better spot, as well as the departments to say, hey, this is what you're trying to do, but we don't want to make sure you go outside of the scope. So to all my members on the floor that have been part of this process, thank you so much, and I really appreciate your support. And with that, Madam President, I close.
It's been moved by the Alderman from the 14th, seconded by the Alderman from the 9th, that we perfect Board Bill number 82, floor substitute. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderwoman Schweitzer. Alderman Oldenburg. Alderman Cone. Alderman Narayan. Alderman Balmer. Alderwoman Velazquez. Alderwoman Sanier. Alderwoman Spencer. Alderman Browning. Alderwoman Clark Hubbard. Alderwoman Keys. Alderwoman Tyus. Alderwoman Boyd. Alderman Aldrich. President Green.
Aye.
Alderman Cone. 11 aye votes, 2 no votes, and 1 abstain.
By your vote, you've sustained the motion from the Alderman from the 14th to perfect Board Bill number 82, floor substitute.
Board Bill 29 Committee Sub as amended, sponsored by Alderwoman Spencer, Alderwoman Boyd, Alderwoman Keys, Alderwoman Schweitzer, Alderman Cone, and Alderman Narayan. An ordinance to prohibit persons from openly carrying, displaying any firearm readily capable of lethal use within the city unless the person possesses a valid concealed carry endorsement or permit as provided herein, and containing a severability and an emergency clause.
Alderwoman from the 8th, you are recognized on the perfection of Board Bill 29 Committee Substitute as amended.
Thank you, Madam President. I move that we perfect Board Bill 29 Committee Substitute as amended.
It's been moved by the Alderwoman from the 8th, seconded by the Alderwoman from the 1st, that we perfect Board Bill number 29 Committee Substitute as amended. Alderwoman, you may proceed.
Thank you, Madam President. Board Bill 29 is a bill that would restrict the open carrying of firearms in the city of St. Louis for folks who do not have a concealed carry permit. As we discussed a little bit prior, we've discussed this bill at length actually, but just to give a little bit of history here, the open carrying of firearms was illegal in the city of St. Louis going back to like 1970. There was a local ordinance. The same was true of Kansas City and a handful of other cities in the state of Missouri. In 2014, the state legislature, in their infinite wisdom, passed what we've come to kind of recognize as a preemption law, which preempts cities in the state of Missouri from handling just about anything related to guns, the sale, the purchase, the ownership, etc., and leaves one narrow exception for cities, municipalities in the state to regulate, to restrict the open carrying of firearms, with the exception of folks who have a concealed carry permit. So what Board Bill 29 would do would be to take that exemption, that path for which the state of Missouri has granted municipalities the authority to restrict the open carrying of firearms within the city of St. Louis. I want to say that in 2014, when that state law passed, it was at that same exact time, or around that time, that Kansas City and a handful of municipalities in the St. Louis area took it upon themselves to pass local ordinances. People ask me all the time, well, in Kansas City, they've got this ordinance and they don't enforce it. That's right, they don't have to enforce it. The open carrying of firearms never became legal there. It never became commonplace, and you, typically speaking, don't see people walking down the street of Kansas City with semi-automatic weapons in their hands, and that is not the case here in St. Louis. It did become legal in 2014 when our local ordinance was invalidated by that state law. And it became known over the subsequent years that you could walk down the street with a weapon, a large weapon, at any age, and without any training or anything like that, and our police department could do nothing. And so now we're in a situation which is very volatile and very dangerous, where the open carrying of firearms is not only legal, but is very pervasive and very prevalent. Board Bill 29 would make it illegal for you to do that, to openly carry a firearm against an ordinance without a concealed carry permit. Concealed carry permits are regulated by the state of Missouri, and you do have to be 19 to obtain one. So what this would do is kind of help us, give us a tool to restrict the open carrying of firearms within our neighborhoods and our city. What it doesn't do is address concealed carry. So you could still carry a concealed weapon, and this does nothing to address that. The state of Missouri has made it very clear that they do not want cities to regulate the concealed carrying of firearms within the state of Missouri. So, with that, this is not a solution to gun violence. This is not the solution to gun violence. This is not going to overnight address the violence in our communities, but it is a tool, and it is a path forward. It is a way to say we don't want the open carrying of firearms in our neighborhoods and our cities, and I think this is a path we should take. With that, there's been several opinions by our city councilor, by other folks as well, to weigh in on the legality of it, to weigh in on questions. I want to commend this body, specifically, oh gosh, I'm going to get all the numbers wrong. Alderman Ryan, Alderman Aldrich, Alderwoman Saunier, Alderwoman Velasquez, Alderman Browning, folks who have brought up concerns from the beginning to have this deliberative body pull this bill back. We have done a lot of work over the last weeks. I was remiss to not recognize the president of the board and many other staff members who have really helped to make this bill a better place. That's why we have not only a committee substitute, but amendments. Through the process, through the deliberation process, we added a tracking mechanism. We have added some other language that puts in place a policy that would be overseen put in place by our police department and vetted by our city councilor's office. So we have come a long way since the introduction of this bill. I really commend the entire Board of Aldermen and the general public for weighing in and making this a more collaborative effort, I look forward to having a discussion perhaps here, but would ask for your favorable support on the perfection of Board Bill 29 today.
Is there any further discussion? Alderman from the 4th.
Thank you, Madam President. This is another bill that we've done a lot of work on. I want to thank the Alderwoman from the 8th for her willingness to continue to put in work. I know sometimes we file a bill and we think it's kind of a, no pun intended, silver bullet, and then some of our colleagues point out some of the flaws with that piece of legislation. And she's been willing to work on this over and over. I'd also like to thank Sheena Hamilton for her quick turnaround time on legal opinions on this. She realized that time was of the essence, that it was important for the sponsors to get this done before our summer recess, so that hopefully we didn't have a summer with particularly kids walking around our city with openly carrying guns. I did say just a minute ago that I'm unapologetically American and brought up the Bill of Rights, and it's not lost on me that the Second Amendment is in that Bill of Rights. That's something that I've talked about with many of my colleagues here, that I do have concerns anytime it comes to curtailing any of our rights. And the only reason that I was really able to get behind this is because this is about kids carrying guns in our city. During the committee hearings and from some of my colleagues, I heard concerns that this may be a new stop and frisk, and I don't personally see those concerns, and I've said that to my colleagues. I think that this is something, if you're openly carrying a gun in the city of St. Louis, be prepared to show your concealed carry weapons permit. For any adult out there who feels that they need to openly carry in our city for whatever reason, I think that's strange to me, but make sure that you go and talk to our fine sheriff and get your concealed carry weapon permit either renewed or get one, and then you will not have to worry about running afoul of this. This, in my opinion, is a bill to stop children from carrying guns in our city, and we've seen far too much violence from children carrying guns, and if we can stop children from carrying guns, we should. For whatever reason, our state legislature can't get around the idea that young kids should not be walking around urban environments with rifles, and I can't make sense of that either. It's frustrating to me that we have to thread the needle in these ways, because this is something that ultimately our politicians in Jefferson City should be looking at and solving these issues, because there's a clear difference in between a kid hunting with his parents and a kid walking around on Market Street with a rifle. And I'll be supportive of this today, and I am a co-sponsor of it because I want to stop children from walking around with rifles in our city. And with that, I'll yield. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Alderman from the 14th.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board. To comment on the bill, this legislation has came a long way. There's been a lot of conversations. I know when this bill originally came to the Public Safety Committee, I know several members of color that sit on that committee had concerns. I know while some of my colleagues thought our concerns was we were against the bill for political reasons, didn't believe that stop and frisk was a thing, didn't believe that we wanted to work in good faith with the Alderwoman, but just wanted to hold her bill up. I can tell you this, as I've said it before, as the only at least black man down here, is as we've been seeing the recent videos on social media and the news, and kind of became reactionary to we need to do something. And I think this board has always wanted to do something, but Jeff City has tied our hands. But within that, my biggest concern is, we can write legislation, and sometimes those have unintended consequences. And one of those concerns was, what does that look like when a law enforcement interact with a child or an adult that is carrying a gun, potentially an AK or something bigger than theirs, and the police officer walks up to them and asks them, do they have a license? And where is the person head frame or their mindset when a police officer walks up to them? And I could speak off of what I've seen in my community and in areas where we've seen majority of people that have these guns. A lot of times those situations don't turn out where people go home to their family. And I actually respect the Alderwoman from the 8th a lot more for really listening to those concerns, making sure that there was, as she allowed some amendments from some of those colleagues that had concerns, that there's a racial tracking element to it, and has put a lot of work and conversation in with us to ensure that we can get to a spot that is comfortable. I also appreciate her willing to politically compromise, and I'm just kidding, to work with her colleagues and actually work with it. What was interesting is it was more people in favor of enforcement right off the bat, but when it came to transparency, it was like, oh, I don't know if we should do this, or I don't know if we should be doing that, which was just, it still shocks me to this day as we look at the vote count. However, you have really done the work on this. You've addressed the concerns as much as to your ability that you can. We don't know what happens after it goes into effect, but I really do commend you, because me and you was talking about this bill every other day. I was grilling you like, Kara, I don't know about this, because I didn't want to do something and pass something where either officer life was at risk, or the individual who's carrying that gun would not be walking home to their mother, their father. And again, I know this is to stop everybody, but the individuals that we've been seeing recently that have been carrying guns are individuals that look like me. And, that is still, I would say, a fear. But until we see how this legislation works, I think none of us just want to sit on our hands. None of us want to just continue to allow another summer. It don't even matter if it's summer, winter, or spring, to allow individuals to be able to walk down the street. And I want to be clear, they ain't just been downtown. We see them on Goodfellow, we see them on Natural Bridge, everywhere. In Dutchtown area, where people are walking down the street with these guns, and like police officers said, they can't do anything because it's state law that allows them to be able to do this. So I commend you for finding the loophole, but even more, working with your colleagues to make that perfect sausage or chicken or whatever people's food ability is that they eat, but really do, because while some others may thought that we were holding yours down to move another one, at the end of the day, even last week, you took leadership and said, you understand how important it is to ensure if we're going to do enforcement at this board, you know, how do we also, and we want to give our law enforcement the tools to be able to do their job, how do we also help restore trust in that department where people that, you know, are raising legit concerns can do the same thing. You know, I don't think it's or it's a and. How do we do this and something else? And you've been willing to figure out what that pathway look like, understanding that people have concerns with just enforcement, with not citizens having rights at the same time. So thank you for your leadership. I think we got to a good spot that more people that had concerns can actually vote yes on this. At least I can speak for myself. Your collaboration in committee, allowing amendments on from your colleagues that had concerns about it. You've met with us several times. You've gotten legal opinions from the city councilor. You've met with all the right departments, I believe, to try to get it to a good spot. So I am in a different place where I was when we had that first committee hearing, and I was like, no, this is not coming out. But we was able to get it out because you did the work. So I appreciate your leadership on it.
Alderman from the 5th.
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to be added as a co-sponsor. I thought it was on this already, but I am not. If you could, please do that. Because in my ward last fall, a teenager walked to a school with a automatic weapon and 600 rounds of ammunition down the street, and he was completely legal until he actually fired the gun. This is one of the most devastating things I've ever been part of in my life. And for the police to have no power whatsoever, for a child to walk down the street with an AR-15, you know, it's very, very scary. So please add me as a co-sponsor. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Alderwoman from the, okay, Alderwoman from the 10th, and then I'll go to Alderwoman from the 12th.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board. I'm going to move to another mic because I want to ask Alderwoman Spencer if she will yield to question.
Okay.
The shorter mic.
I get the little mic.
The Alderwoman from the 8th yield to questioning from the Alderwoman from the 10th.
I will. Thank you, Madam President.
You may
Right.
proceed.
Thank you so much, Alderwoman Spencer. So you and I's conversations, along with all of our other colleagues, have been ongoing with this, and I thank you. I echo the thank yous and the sentiments of the collaboration that has gotten us this far. And you know that we are all down here in our own lived experiences and different perspectives. So I wanted to bring a different perspective for this in reference to the Save Our Youth rally that I attended at Harris-Stowe about 2 weeks ago. And I told you about the young mother, right? This young African-American mother who cried out to the sponsors, cried out to the organizer of this event to take the gun out of her son's hand. This is her son, you know, that she loves and carries and cares for, and she cried out to help her with her son, take this gun out of her son's hand. So with that, you know, one of my concerns was what it would look like when an officer engaged. Would they be able to take their weapon? To Alderman Valmer's reference, I brought it up because I'm a mother of a CBPA student, and we saw the stories where that mother tried several times to have officers come to her home and get that weapon, right, and they couldn't. So my question is, because you know I'm big on, he got me like, you know, I'm big on education, in which I've already signed up and made myself available for education on this bill as well as the previous bill we passed. What does that look like as a parent if my child is caught or is engaged and he's carrying an assault weapon, a weapon that can be, what then looks like, where do we go from there, and is that weapon able to be confiscated?
Thank you, Alderwoman, for that question, because it's one I've got around an issue that I've heard a lot of questions about. One of the amendments was to remove the confiscation at conviction clause, and that was at the request and identification of our city councilor, who pointed out that in her reading it conflicted with state law, so it's caused a significant amount of confusion. The confiscation at conviction clause was just at conviction. So once you have been identified as breaking the local ordinance, you would go through the process and potentially be convicted. The removal of that does not impact our police department's ability to interact directly and immediately with the gun at the time that the ordinance is being broken. So to answer your question in more clearer terms, what I'll say is when a person is observed openly carrying a firearm, a police officer under this ordinance would have the right be directed to ask if that person has a concealed carry permit. If they do not, in accordance with the ordinance, the police department is in the process right now of developing the policy around what happens there. That policy will go through our city councilor's office and be vetted by the mayor's office as well. What will happen at that time is our police department will take the weapon and process it. They'll take it back to the station, and by processing it, they will check to see if it's been involved in identified illegal activities and violence, if it's been defaced, or if there's been some other activity that has happened to the gun that is indicating additional criminal activity. If not, that person is free to come back and get their weapon in accordance to existing St. Louis Police Department policy, which is available online. You sign an affidavit that the gun is yours, etc., and you can come back and receive your weapon. It is not going to be confiscated for the long term at that conviction stage. You can get it back, but it is, according to police policy, able to be removed from the situation, the volatile situation, presumably, or just the open carrying situation that the officer has observed in a street, in a neighborhood, etc., and removed at that time for processing.
Thank you so much, and thank you for making sure that not only our body, but our constituency, our residents are clear about that, because, again, we all down here on our own perspectives, and me as a mother of a teenager in times like this, this gives me some assurance, right? Because none of us are with our children 24/7, and to your point earlier, this is a tool, right? And so if you want to think of what this tool does to me and my mind as a mother, it takes guns off the street, especially ones that are being used irresponsibly. So thank you for this legislation, and again, I will be in support of this today.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Alderwoman from the 12th.
Madam President and members of the board, if the Alderwoman from the 8th would yield.
The Alderwoman from the 8th yield to questioning from the Alderwoman from the 12th.
Yes, thank you.
Alderwoman, you may proceed.
Thank you. Alderwoman, I have read this legislation. I've listened to both sides. I've lived some of the sides. The perspective that the Alderman from the 14th talked about stop and frisk. I've lived that for many years, even with my own husband. Not frisk, but stops. If I'm driving, no stops. Black woman, older, granny caucus, no stops. Even when I wasn't a granny caucus, no stop. But my husband gets in his vehicles that he paid for, and he gets stopped. Now he's older than me, but he gets stopped. What are you doing driving this luxury vehicle that he paid for? And as a public offender, I experienced that with many of my clients. But one of the places that it was really brought home for me was in New York, when we had a governor who was a mayor who was a billionaire, and they used it to clean up Central Park and all around there, Times Square, but they used it by violating people's rights. Everybody said, oh, look, it's a safe place to live. Now you can go there, but they violated young black people's rights. And there's something called the Central Park 5 right now that our former person who used to be the president, that I don't say their name, still tries to say those people were guilty when they were exonerated. And that's what happens. And they were in trouble. They were imprisoned. One of them, I think, now is becoming a city council member, okay? But as a youth, he was imprisoned because of being stopped and frisked and falsely accused and everything else. So when people of color come from that perspective, and it doesn't just have to be black people. I have a lot of my family. I have Hispanic people in my family. I have Asian blacks. I have Hispanic blacks. And so they also get stopped and frisked. And in fact, long-haired hippie white boys get stopped and frisked sometime, and that was a thing. That was a song in my time, and the song said long-haired long-haired
Need not apply.
Need not apply, exactly. So all these people are getting their rights violated because people think they don't belong, or they don't want to give them the civil rights that the alderman talked about that everybody should have. So first thing I want to say is this doesn't just address youth. This bill also addressed adults, right? So everybody's like, oh, what will happen to the kids? But when I read it, it says on page 3 of 6, for those individuals 18 years of age or older, which is the last paragraph. So that's an adult, right?
That is correct. What I think, however, anybody who has a concealed carry permit under this law can still openly carry a firearm.
Right.
But under state law, no one under the age of 19, except those military 18 and older, can get a concealed carry permit. So it would necessarily eliminate children carrying firearms.
Right.
Because they would, yeah.
What I heard is, oh, that they're targeting our youth. Okay, and I'm like, no, well, what I read here, there's a violation for anybody who, when they demand it, you have to produce it, right? If I'm 18, and in fact, if you're over 18, you can get a fine and you can have a period of incarceration, whereas if you're under 18, you can get a fine, but you do not have incarceration, you have community service. Is that correct?
That is, your question is specifically for children or?
Mhm. For young people under 18 of age, right. No incarceration.
For juveniles would be directed to juvenile courts rather than the municipal court. And speaking with juvenile court system, they have no intention of incarcerating youth for openly carrying a firearm. I'm very well assured that they will not be incarcerated. They're looking to provide an intervention involving their parents or their guardians, and making sure that they have resources that they may need to address what might be going on to make them feel like they need to carry a weapon.
But I want to specifically say that Section B of Section 2 says, for the individual under age 18 years of age, a violation of the provision of this ordinance may be punishable by a fine of not more than $500 or community service for a period of hours to be determined by the court. It does not say any incarceration for youth. So that's one thing that I want to be made perfectly clear. I did have a question about, this is the thing that makes me kind of nervous. In Section 1, it talks about upon demand of the last line, it says when you could ask for ID. Upon a demand of a law enforcement officer, except as provided in Section B of this section, that's when you have to provide it. So can you kind of walk me through what would make, so the impetus would be if the law enforcement officer saw someone walking down the street, then just upon demand, they could say, show me your permit. Is that correct?
Yes, so an officer would be able to approach and say, okay, I see you've got a firearm. Do you have a concealed carry permit, which is required, and then asked to see it.
So that's what makes black people nervous, because then that goes into with that officer's perspective of who is somebody should not have a gun, okay? So as I just said, Sterling Miller should not drive a luxury vehicle. Although he makes a lot of money, he shouldn't drive a luxury vehicle because he's a black male. Mm-hmm. And that's my husband, okay, in case people don't know. So that's what makes people nervous. Is there some other criteria as just seeing the gun?
The criteria is just openly displaying a firearm. So, and as the chief of police has pointed out, this is the first place he's worked where the open carrying of firearms is legal. It's not something you typically see. Missouri just happens to be a state that allows for the open carrying of firearms. So this, again, would not do anything for a weapon in your pocket or your backpack or anything like that, but it's just the sort of aggressive stance of carrying it openly, which is can be a very volatile thing to engage in.
So I was here before we had this. I was at the board. We begged every governor and every state legislature to exempt any kind of laws about such open carry, to exempt St. Louis out of it. We did it for a lot of years. We said, please, please don't do that. And I think it was under Governor Matt Blunt that we were allowed to do this. And so again, the state has made it legal, and then we have this exception that says, well, but if the police officer wants to, even though it's legal to do it, if you have a ID, he can then just say, let me see your permit to carry. And so that's that kind of gray area, I think, that makes people legal. But I had to come to conclusion, and this is, I'm just telling you this, so for me, the police officers can also, when you're asked to see your ID, okay, if you're driving a car or whatever. And I also had to come to the conclusion that, for me, that in my community, where I hear people are carrying guns, it's the older people, and they're intimidated, and they have to go inside their houses now. They can't sit on their on their porches, because the young men are out there with those guns. So I finally had to weigh down that it was no more of a violation than there was always going to be some problems with walking while black, driving while black, anything while black. And I use black, but I mean anything other than white males. There's been racial problems and stereotyping for a long time. This doesn't provide any extra for me, okay? And that's why I decided to support it and think that it is a good bill. My other question I had is on page 2 of 6, line 1, 2, it talks about who would be exempted out of showing this ID, and it says any person summoned by such officers to assist in making arrests or preserving the peace while actually engaging in assisting an officer. So if an officer brought a fireman or whoever else over to help, or an EMT, and they had a gun, they wouldn't be required to show their ID because they're assisting the officer with whatever they need to do. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct, and I believe that's a function of state law to make sure that we're conforming with that state law path.
Okay, and just to follow up on the alderman who talked about the Second Amendment, I always just like to read into law. The Second Amendment does not say what we have extended it to say. The Second Amendment says, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. All that other stuff, and there have been Supreme Court justices that have said how ridiculous our laws have evolved to about our right to have all of these guns. And there's no way in the world that when the people wrote the Constitution, they envisioned anything but a rifle. Or maybe if you watch Rifleman, he had taken his rifle and made it so it can shoot a couple of times. But other than, I like old Westerns, okay? I watch them. But other than that, there's no way that anybody envisioned the weapons that we have on our streets today. And we certainly didn't envision it for anything but if when we made them, I thought for war. We did not mean to be at war with our citizens. So I come down to, on the side of I'm supporting this legislation. I read stuff. I'm going through all the experiences. But all in all, if they can ask you for your ID, if you drive or if you're walking down and they have reason to ask you about your ID, I have no problem with them asking you for your ID. If you are carrying a assault weapon, or any weapon at all, actually, openly carrying it, because it intimidates people. It is not right. And I'm glad that you have a piece in which you track things, because that's people don't like tracking, because then that does show when people are not implementing the law fairly. So I thank you for that, and I will be supporting the board bill, and thank you for your leadership in this issue.
Any further discussion? Alderwoman from the 1st.
Thank you so much, Madam President, members of the board. I appreciate this bill a lot. I think one of the things that we're hoping for in general is more common sense gun legislation in Missouri. And I really applaud Alderwoman from the 8th for finding a way for the city of St. Louis to enact more common sense gun legislation. I wouldn't even call it a loophole. I would call it a provision of state law that cities are able to enforce this, and we should. We have seen anyone openly carrying a gun in this without a concealed carry permit, like this law outlines, probably shouldn't be. So I think that it's a very good step forward for the city of St. Louis to take some control back into its own hands when thinking about our gun laws. And I've heard so many people speak in favor of this bill today. So with that, I will make a motion to make this bill in bank.
Hearing no objection, there's been a motion to pass Board Bill 29 Committee Substitute as amended in bank. All those in favor signify by saying, we need a second on that. It's been seconded by the Alderman from the 4th. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Alderwoman, you may proceed.
Thank you so much. I think this is a great show of force from the Board of Aldermen on this bill to show that we have found, by the leadership of the Alderman from the 8th, a way to make this bill address the concerns that folks have and to make sure that the city has some more strength here, and we need it. So thank you.
Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Alderwoman from the 8th, you are recognized to close.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board. I just want to again reiterate my thanks to my colleagues, to the President's office, to specifically Janika, who really helped with draft out the tracking piece, which I think is very important to holding ourselves accountable. I think we'll be able to review how this law was enforced every year. I think that's a very, very good thing. And reiterate my thanks to Sheena Hamilton, who, as the alderman from the XY 4th Ward has pointed out, was extremely quick in her turnarounds. I'd also add Judge Durker, who added his opinion on the constitutionality of the bill, which I think was very helpful. And of course, who I haven't mentioned today, but have in the past, Joe Taylor, a lawyer within our community who volunteered countless hours. He's the one who really found this path. He's the one who really identified this, as the Alderwoman from the 1st pointed out, this pathway, this very straightforward pathway through state law. Thank you all. This bill is infinitely better, I think, for the pushback, for the concerns of all of you down here, and I'm hoping this can be a small tool in the toolbox to addressing gun violence in our communities. And with that, Madam President, I stand on the motion.
All right, it's been moved by the Alderwoman from the 8th, seconded by the Alderwoman from the 1st, that we perfect Board Bill number 29, Committee Substitute as amended. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderwoman Schweitzer. Alderman Oldenburg. Alderman Cone. Alderman Narayan. Alderman Balmer. Alderwoman Velazquez. Alderwoman Sanier. Alderwoman Spencer. Alderman Browning. Alderwoman Clark Hubbard. Alderwoman Keys. Alderwoman Tyus. Alderwoman Boyd. Alderman Aldridge. President Green.
Aye.
Alderman Cone. 14 aye votes.
By your vote, you sustain the motion for the perfection of Board Bill 29, Committee Substitute as amended. Report of engrossment.
Board Bill 77, 31, 70, 73, 76, 69, 56, 74, 51, 52, and 53.
Third reading and final passage of Board Bills consent.
Board Bill 77, 31, 70, 73, 76, 69, 56, 74, 51, 52, and 53.
Alderwoman from the 10th, you are recognized on the motion to adopt the third reading and final passage of Board Bills on the consent calendar.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board. I move that we adopt the third reading and final passage of Board Bills consent calendar.
Is there a second? Second. We're slow in our seconds today. It was moved by the Alderwoman from the 10th, seconded by the Alderwoman from the 11th, that we adopt the third reading and final passage of Board Bills on the consent calendar. Alderwoman from the 12th.
Madam President, if you would take Board Bill 56 off the third reading, final passage, and move it to the third reading, please.
Madam Clerk, please make note of that.
So noted.
Right. It's been moved by the Alderwoman from the 10th, seconded by the Alderwoman from the 11th, that we adopt the third reading and final passage of Board Bills consent calendar. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderwoman Schweitzer. Alderman Oldenburg. Alderman Cone. Alderman Narayan. Alderman Balmer. Alderwoman Velazquez. Alderwoman Sanier. Alderwoman Spencer. Alderman Browning. Alderwoman Clark Hubbard. Alderwoman Keys. Alderwoman Tyus. Alderwoman Boyd. Alderman Aldridge. President Green.
Aye.
Alderman Cone. 14 aye votes.
By your vote, you have sustained the motion from the Alderwoman from the 10th and have third read and finally passed the aforementioned bills. Third reading and final passage of Board Bills.
Board Bill 56, sponsored by Alderman Narayan, an ordinance requiring the municipal to assess a $7 surcharge for the state automation in addition to any other court costs assessed by the court in cases in which costs are assessed. Cost or assessed.
Alderman from the 4th, you're recognized on the third reading and final passage of Board Bill 56.
Thank you, Madam President. I move that we third read and finally pass Board Bill 56.
It's been moved by the Alderman from the 4th, seconded by the Alderman from the 9th, that we third read and finally pass Board Bill number 56. Any discussion? Alderwoman from the 12th.
Madam President, members of the board, if the alderman from the 4th would yield.
The Alderman from the 4th yield to questioning from the Alderwoman from the 12th.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Alderman or Alderwoman, you may proceed.
Thank you. Alderman, I had told you that I had some questions, which is why I wanted to move it down. I support the bill, but I wanted to just have a little bit more discussion about it on the floor where people could see. Can you tell me this surcharge, which is, what is it, $6?
I believe it's $7.
Right. And it is to be assessed on cases initiated or disposed under the mandatory Missouri statewide court automation system. Can you tell me a little bit what that is?
Sure.
Thank you.
So, a couple of years back now, the Supreme Court of the state of Missouri, who has jurisdiction over all the other courts, including our municipal court, started to automate the court filings. And in order to do so, each municipality must institute this $7 fee on any case that results in a finding of guilt, whether that be a guilty plea or a jury trial, a bench trial, that the defendant, once they're found guilty, is assessed, in addition to other court costs, is assessed this $7 fee. That $7 fee goes towards the automation of our court system. So it's the actual carrying out of the court's business. If anyone uses, CaseNet, things like that, as CaseNet has opened up to allow the general public to utilize it, there's a increased cost on the courts as the clerks have to scan all these documents and get them up, and there's additional tech people and things of that nature. And so in order to come into compliance with the Supreme Court's order, we must do this. I take no joy in tacking on an additional $7 in court costs. That's not something that I want to do, but I did feel compelled after Judge McCoy let me know kind of the trick box that our municipal courts were in, where we have to have this fee, or else our municipal court could actually be held in contempt of the Supreme Court's order, and no more cases be given to the municipal court. All of the cases would then go to the state court. I felt, even though it's probably politically unpopular to institute a new $7 fee, that when the courts come asking the legislative branch for help, I think we need to help them out.
And so you just said something, so tell us the difference between what the municipal court is and the state court is.
Sure. So the state court allows for, we have circuit court, associate circuit court, and so in our county, and St. Louis is an interesting one because it's both a city and a county, but the the state court, the circuit court, allows for a municipal court to exist to dispose of minor issues. Now, and as a result, that falls under our city charter.
Right.
So you're not going to be spending time in a state penitentiary for anything. And in fact, our fines, with the exception of illegal dumping, which the voters approved some time back, the alderman from the 2nd worked on that. With the exception of illegal dumping, any fine would be limited to $500, whereas in associate circuit, I believe associate circuit is able to institute fines and things of that nature up to $25,000.
Right.
And then you move to circuit court, where the sky's the limit. And so this is ensuring that we can still operate a municipal court, because or else the fines and jail time for some of these could become draconian if a judge decided that they were having a bad day and wanted to throw the book at someone.
So in the municipal court, we often call it city court, and it's that 1520 market. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And one final thing, no surcharge will be assessed if the defendant is dismissed or acquitted. Is that correct?
That is correct, and after talking to Judge McCoy on this, the Supreme Court also gives the leeway if a person is indigent or otherwise just cannot afford the fees, that the court can either assess community service in lieu of the fee, or in some instances waive the fee altogether. So we're not going to have a situation like we've seen in some surrounding areas where a true inability to pay court costs results in warrants, and then all of a sudden you're in a cycle of incarceration because you couldn't afford $30 in court fees.
Which court cases have found to be illegal, by the way, what you just decided. It is not legal.
Absolutely.
But the reason why we don't have all of this in our ordinance is because the courts give the judge the leeway to do that and address it in multiple ways. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Thank you. I have no further questions. Thank you for presenting Board Bill 56. I will be supporting it, and I was supportive already. I just wanted people to understand what it was a little better. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Any further discussion? Any further discussion? It's been moved by the Alderman from the 4th, seconded by the Alderman from the 9th, that we third read and finally pass Board Bill number 56. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderwoman Schweitzer. Alderman Oldenburg. Alderman Cone. Alderman Narayan. Alderman Balmer. Alderwoman Velazquez. Alderwoman Sanier. Alderwoman Spencer. Alderman Browning. Alderwoman Clark Hubbard. Alderwoman Keys. Alderwoman Tyus. Alderwoman Boyd. Alderman Aldridge. President Green.
Aye.
Alderman Cone. 14 aye votes.
By your vote, you sustain the motion on the third reading and final passage of Board Bill 56. Reported the finally passed and signed by the President.
Board Bill 77, 31, 70, 73, 76, 69, 74, 51, 52, 53, and Board Bill 56.
All other business being suspended, the President shall in open session affix her signature hereto to the end that these may become law. First reading of resolutions in reference to committees.
Resolution 48, sponsored by Alderwoman Clark Hubbard and President Green, recommitment to the responsibilities leveraging of settlement funds.
Alderwoman from the 10th, you are recognized on the first reading resolution number 48.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board. I would like to ask for unanimous consent for resolution number 48.
Hearing no objection, you may proceed.
Thank you. This is just reaffirming the commitment that we made in the last session since we have new board members now. Our commitment to transparency and resident inclusion in the decisions and the moving forward of the RAM settlement funds.
Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Would you like to move for adoption of resolution number 10 or number 48?
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board. I move that we adopt resolution number 48.
Is there a second? It's been moved by the Alderwoman from the 10th, seconded by the Alderman from the 14th, that we adopt resolution number 48. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Resolution 49, sponsored by Alderman Orion, Medical Transportation Company doing business as MMT.
Alderman from the 4th, you are recognized in the first reading of resolution number 49.
Thank you, Madam President. I request unanimous consent.
Hearing no objection, you may proceed.
Thank you, Madam President. Members of the board, this is a contract to enter into that allows our city to have more ambulances. This has been vetted by the chief of the fire department. We've seen recently, sometimes we, in times of emergency, have not had enough ambulances. This will help to cure some of that. I think it's important to note that these ambulances will not be used for emergency transportation. They'll be used for kind of more routine transportation, but that does free up our fleet to be doing those emergency trips. And after discussions with Chief Jenkerson, he is supportive of this, and I would request your support.
Would you like to move to adopt resolution number 49?
I move that we adopt Resolution 49.
It's been moved by the Alderman from the 4th, seconded by the Alderwoman from the 1st, that we adopt resolution number 49. Any further discussion? Alderwoman from the 10th.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board. Just so I'm clear, I wanted to ask if it could be passed and banked.
There's been a motion that we approve resolution number 49 in bank. There's been a second from the Alderwoman from the 1st. Any objection? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. It's been moved by the Alderman from the 1st, seconded by the Alderman from the 4th, seconded by the Alderwoman from the 1st, that we adopt resolution number 49. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Resolution 50, sponsored by Alderwoman Schweitzer, Holly Hill Special Business District Annual Budget.
Alderwoman from the 1st, you are recognized on the first reading of resolution 50.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board. I ask for unanimous consent.
Hearing no objection, you may proceed.
Thank you so much. So per ordinance, when we pass the special business districts in our neighborhoods, they do need to present their budget to the Board of Aldermen for approval through a resolution format. The budget they presented is the budget that was set again by that ordinance for enabling the special business district before it did go to a vote and pass overwhelmingly. This is the first time they're presenting the budget, and they've been really wonderful in our community already, very good at making sure that the public is engaged in the decision-making process. There's about 55 people in the committees for the special business district, so it's a very engaged neighborhood doing a lot of really good work. So with that, I would move for the adoption of resolution number 50.
Is there a second? It's been moved by the Alderwoman from the 1st, seconded by the Alderman from the 14th, that we adopt resolution number 50. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
That's the extent of first reading of resolutions and reference to committees.
Second reading of resolutions, committee reports and adoptions.
Report from the Legislation and Rules Committee, Charter Commission nominations.
Alderman from the 5th, you are recognized on the motion to approve nominees for the Charter Commission.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board. In doing this, there's no need for a motion here, right? I'm just going to have a little discussion about the process, if I could. Of the 14 total wards, only 9 aldermen had nominees listed. My understanding is that some turned in late, some didn't turn in. So, of those 151 people who volunteered to be part of this process, we ended up with only a class of 22 as opposed to 42, 3 per alderman. In going through this, having had 3 candidates myself, I found out that none of these candidates had been contacted. There was no interview process. So what we're finding out as we do something for the first time, that there's a better way to do it the next time. We made a lot of notes on this because what occurs is that in a very rushed process, even though it's 50 days to turn in for people to sign up, then the mayor gives it back to us on June 30th, and we have a holiday week there, and then all of a sudden we were given 9 people who were basically to say thanks for giving us the 9 people, and here they are. We need to look into amending this ordinance to put a longer time frame on this, to have an interview process done. My comments here are nothing disparaging to the people who were picked. God bless you for volunteering to jump into this fray that we do every day. I am hopefully that this will work out. My hopes are very high that this will work out, but we are talking about making changes to the thing that is the foundation of our city government and recommendations that we want from a widespread. There are geographic things put in place. So we have 3 from the north, 3 from central, 3 from south. We ended up with 2 nominees coming from the 6th ward, 2 nominees coming from the 14th ward, and 1 each from the 2nd, 9th, 7th, 11th, and 12th. And basically what we have are 9 people that the mayor has picked from the 22 that we presented to her. At this point, we're to vote here, hopefully. All of you have read through their resumes and applications because that's the way they were chosen, by only their resumes and applications, which when I hire a dishwasher, a cook, or a server at my place, I want to meet with them face to face, eye to eye, and have a conversation. And these people are just handling menial task, very important task, but we are, again, to put 9 people who are going to make amendments and changes and suggestions to our charter. I think we should have a much more thorough thing. Now, I realize that's 10 years away. Personally, I don't plan on being here next time, but I would, hopefully, we can amend this ordinance and put this into a little more stringent and detailed application process and nomination process. Before I would read them, or if you're not familiar with them or you do anything, I believe we have discussion that wants to take place. I'm open to any questions.
Okay, we will take discussion, but there is going to have to be a motion at some point in time on the table.
All right. Well, I'm not sure because as this is not a board bill or a resolution, I was unfamiliar with that. Thank you.
Yes.
So then I will move to nominate these 9 folks that the mayor has presented us to the St. Louis Charter Commission. 1 Jasmine Nolan Eccles of the 11th Ward, 1 Travis Sheridan of the 14th Ward, 1 Reginald Garth of the 14th Ward, 1 Scott Intagariata of the 9th Ward, Anna Crossland of the 6th Ward, Anthony Riley of the 12th Ward, Brianna Bobo of the 1st Ward, but I believe she's the 2nd Ward. I'm not sure about that. I believe she's actually in the 2nd Ward. David Dwight the 4th of the 7th Ward, and Christopher Grant of the 6th Ward. There was my motion.
Is there a second? It's been moved by the alderman from the 5th, seconded by the alderman from the 2nd, that we approve the mayor's nominees to the Charter Commission. Is there further discussion? Alderwoman from the 12th.
Madam President, members of the board, I had an inquiry, but I did do it as a sideboard. And I just want to make a correction. It wasn't just north. It had to be north of Page. and that was my only.
My document does not have that in there, so I
I
apologize.
know, but
for that.
we, when we were over at, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't get correct, I'm sorry. Madam President, members of the board, if the alderman from the, what are you, fifth ward would inquire.
Would the alderman from the 5th yield for questioning from the alderwoman from the 12th?
It's the moment I've been waiting for all day.
Alderwoman, you may proceed.
Oh, I guess I'm going to take off my shoes because we're going to be here for about the next 2 hours since he said that, okay?
It's always, I get to talk to you all day, now I get to do it officially.
I've been very short and concise, but it seems that he wants a long session. What time is it? I can easily make it go to 3 or 4 o'clock, okay? Anyway, Alderman, you made a comment about that it north, south, and middle.
Yes.
And so the reason why I was really concerned about that is that when we were over at the other place, when we first went back in session, we wanted to make sure that there were people that were at least 3 people who lived north of Page. I did inquire of the alderman from the 14th, and he's assured me that that was so because originally one of the persons I know used to live downtown, but he said he no longer lives there. So I want to make that difference because I'm going to continue to tell people stop talking about the Delmar divide. That's been gone a long time ago. It really is the Page divide. We have to be honest. When you have put that much money between Delmar and Page, and in fact, I'm being contacted by some people who have been putting that money there, and they know it because I was here when they first decided to move Delmar and Page and start going past that. So as long as those people are from north of Page, I'm good. I actually live north of Page, but the person my ward goes central, middle, and north, so there is one of my people that I nominated, and that's the 12th Ward, Reverend Riley. And so I have no further questions, and I'm not going to pose as long as they fulfill the requirements.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
I have no further questions for him, but I'm going to get him as soon as we get off this floor.
Okay. Any further discussion? Any further discussion? It's been moved by the alderman from the 5th, seconded by the alderman from the 2nd, that we approve the mayor's nominees to the Charter Commission. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Report from the Personnel Committee.
I will entertain a motion that the meeting of the full Board of Aldermen be closed to the public under the provisions of Section 610.0213 and Section 610.022 of the Missouri Revised Statutes in order to permit the members of the board to discuss matters relating to the hiring, firing, disciplining, or promoting of employees of the Board of Aldermen. It's been moved by the alderwoman from the 7th, seconded by the alderman from the 14th, that we go into closed session. At this time, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. At this time, would the marshals please clear the gallery and the board floor, and STL TV, please place the full board in closed session. Only members of the board are allowed to stay. And we are back. Miscellaneous and unfinished business.
We have none.
Please dispense with line item 23, announcements.
Monday, July 17, 2023, Special Committee on Long-Term Health Care will have a meeting via webinar at 3 p.m. Thursday, July 20th, 2023, full board meeting via webinar at 10 a.m. That is the extent of the announcements.
We also add a personnel and administration committee meeting for Wednesday at 10 a.m.
So noted.
Any further announcements? Alderman from the 9th.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask if we could have a moment of silence for Mark Barnett. He was a longtime resident of Forest Park Southeast, very active in the community. He lost his life last week when he was struck by a truck while making his way home from work. He was 54 years old, and he will be missed.
We could all bow our heads for a moment of silence. Alderwoman from the 10th.
Madam President, members of the board, I would like to announce a couple of events first. I know today we did a lot to ensure, hopefully, the safety of our youth in the city of St. Louis. So I want to highlight an event coming up tomorrow that celebrates our youth. It's the Young Biz Kid Day. And it's at Harris-Stowe State University from 11 to 2 p.m. Ariel Bivens and the Youth Biz Kids Club, they do an amazing job with encouraging, empowering, and educating our youth on entrepreneurship here in the city of St. Louis. So tomorrow you have the opportunity to support these youth, again, from 11 to 2 p.m. at Harris-Stowe State University for Young Biz Kids Day with the founder and visionary Ariel Biggs. And also there's a free mammogram, breast cancer awareness, and overall health and wellness event that'll be going on in the 10th Ward at New Whitestone, right off of Union, just south of Martin Luther King. It's going to be an amazing event right there on the corner. So if you are looking for something to do in the morning, it begins at 9. Come on now, and there will be free mammograms. You will be able to walk up to that BJC mammogram van. Thank you.
Alderwoman from the 11th.
Thank you, Madam President and members of the board. Just tagging on to what the Alderwoman from the 10th Ward said about the mammograms. Men should also consider having mammograms as the numbers are rising for men having breast cancer as well. Additionally, I would just like to give a congratulations to Claude Cummings and to Amina Salam. My former union, or one of my former unions, when I was a child abuse investigator for the state, was CWA. CWA has just yesterday gained their first black president of the union, and Miss Samina, I hope I'm not butchering her name too bad, Amina Salam was elected as the first black secretary treasurer for CWA. So just congratulations, and this is a wonderful milestone and historic event. Thank you.
Any further announcements? Alderwoman from the 13th.
I just wanted to acknowledge St. Louis Public Schools. They had a legislative meeting, I think that was yesterday. Days are running together. And it was very informative, and they really educated us in regards to what St. Louis Public Schools, the next level that they're going to. So I wanted to thank them because they're continuously being transparent in regard to making sure information is given out to legislators so they'll know what's going on in regards to St. Louis Public Schools. And we did have the new superintendent there, and so that was a pretty good breakfast that they had. Thank you.
Any further announcements? Alderman from the 2nd, were you? I don't think you wanted an announcement. Alderwoman from the 7th.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board. Same thing, I want to echo Alderwoman Boyd about the legislative breakfast that was held yesterday. We had a lot of good conversation We talked about some of the common needs of the city, which include perhaps a special school district, the need for affordable family housing all over our city, and the severe lack of it that we have. And then also I want to give a reminder that we have the 7th Ward Town Hall coming up on July 19th. On Wednesday, I have been knocking doors in several of our neighborhoods, and we'll complete that by the time our town hall is on the 19th. It's at the International Institute, and we will have a representative from the North-South Metrolink expansion, as well as a representative from Bi-State to discuss public transit. Thank you.
Any further announcements? Any further announcements? I have a couple of things. First, I want to thank the members of the board who came out to the first City Youth Council meeting on Monday night. It was really a great meeting. Wonderful to see such engaged kids in our city who really are interested in working with us to address issues relating to gun violence, mental health, bullying, safer streets for walking and learning how to drive. So they will be reaching out throughout their process to engage members of the board in that and see ways that we can partner with them on some of their ideas. Second, I just want to make note that for everybody who has approved a legislative assistant, offer letters that are jointly signed by the alderperson and the clerk need to be out by July 17th in order for them to have a start date on July 31st. And we're trying to start everybody on July 31st so that it's the beginning of a pay period. And also there is a orientation that is being planned for folks. So the more that we can do more people through that orientation at the same time, the easier it makes it on the staff here at the board. And then last, we sent an email yesterday, but I wanted to formally introduce the last addition to my staff, Cecilia Boyers. Cecilia is somebody that was a student of mine at Washington University. She was a practicum student working with me several years ago. She just got done with a criminal justice reform fellowship. And we are lucky to have her come and bring her knowledge and expertise here down at the Board of Aldermen. So I hope you will give Cecilia a warm welcome. All right, Alderwoman from the 10th, you are recognized on the motion to excuse.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board. I move that we excuse the alderman from the 3rd Ward for necessary absence.
It's been moved by the Alderwoman from the 10th, seconded by the Alderman from the 14th, that we excuse the Alderman from the 3rd for necessary absence. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? No. Motion carries. Alderwoman from the 10th, you are recognized on the motion to adjourn until Thursday, July 20th, 2023 at 10 a.m. via webinar.
Thank you, Madam President. I move that we adjourn until Thursday, July 20th, 2023 at 10 a.m. via webinar.
It's been moved by the Alderwoman from the 10th, seconded by the Alderman from the 5th, that we adjourn until Thursday, July 20th, 2023 via webinar. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We are adjourned.